welcome to those on the webcast.
Do you need a second one?
We'll be all right. Yeah, let's do a second.
You need to sit down again.
So we're starting now, so please do take your seats. Welcome all. The wireless details are on the screen and on notes around the room. The hashtag for this event is ODDC, and you can also include OKFest14 as we're a fringe event of the Open Knowledge Festival. And we've also got an Etherpad, which I'll tweet the link to if you want to share in collaborative note-taking. So I'm going to hand over to Josema and then Pavel to welcome us. Maybe Pavel will hand to you first, our kind hosts here at Wikimedia.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you very much. Welcome and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to the public part of the ODDC network meeting. My name is Pavel. I'm the Executive Director of Wikimedia Deutschland, and I welcome you to these premises. I heard you already had 1.5 days full of program and still some stuff ahead of you, so I won't bother with too many introductory remarks, but I wanted to point out that when we moved into these offices here as Wikimedia Deutschland 9 months ago, we made a decision that we need something more than just boring office spaces where people sit in front of a computer. And we saw there's one thing missing in a city like Berlin, and that is infrastructure for all things open. So we decided that we have one big large room like this one we are using now, and the other one over there, which is available for everybody who does anything open. As long as it's open, it is available. So whenever you come to Berlin, or if you are from Berlin, whenever you have something open you want to do, if you want to meet for 2 hours, or if you want to meet for a whole weekend, you can use these spaces. That's what they are there for. Therefore, I'm very, very glad that you are here today, because the ODDC network meeting is exactly what this space is all about. So I'm very proud that you are using it in exactly the way we intended it to be used, and have fun doing so in the next couple of hours. Thank you very much, and have a very good conference.
Okay. Thank you very much, Pavel, and welcome everybody. My name is Jose Alonso, and I'm the Open Data Program Manager at the Web Foundation. We are really thankful to Wikimedia Deutschland for hosting us this last day and a half, and for the remainder of the day today. It's been a really great pleasure to be here. And we are also having some additional connections with Wikimedia, because we just are starting an Open Data Lab in Jakarta, Indonesia, and we have some colleagues from Indonesia around, and we are co-hosting our office with the Wikimedia Foundation there. So the link seems to travel across the globe, which is fortunately great to see. Welcome everybody, and thanks for coming again. So what we will be doing today, Tim will introduce you to the agenda in a few minutes, but what we will be doing today is traveling, along a project we started like 1.5 years ago. We have all the partners here. You heard about the project. You have posters all around the room where you can see some of the research insights that we are producing already, but we will have sessions that will introduce you to some of those insights and the journey that some of these organizations have had with us over the last few months. And we want this to be also an interactive event. So don't expect a lot of talking and slides and that kind of thing. There won't be that much of that. I think Tim will be the only one using the slides, in fact. And we expect a lot of discussion and input from you. And we want also to hear from you, the invited guests, because we know that you are also involved in very interesting research projects. And we want to take this opportunity for you to engage in discussions with the researchers that we have in the project and under the Open Data Research Network, and to leverage those relationships as much as we can in the near future. And I will hand the mic over to Fernando, because frankly, it would not be possible to run this project without funding. And ODDC was the nice organization that allowed us to do so with a grant, as I said, 1.5 years ago. And this is just we're starting. We are planning to do many more interesting things. So Fernando, over to you.
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Fernando. I'm from the International Development Research Center, Canada. And as you talk about journeys, I guess for me, the journey that started this, I think we already started discussing the ideas around creating this network and develop this work 3 years ago. And so it's a great moment to go through all this process of thinking about how it could be developing this more critical perspective or in-depth evidence-based analysis of the open data movement. And when you were thinking back there, it was a very different thing than what this movement is now. So it has been a journey of learning and exploring this space that has been really, really amazing. And I guess for us as IDRC, we are part of International Aid in Canada, and we focus very specifically, our mission is on research and how knowledge can bring change in developing worlds. So basically try to build through the knowledge and power to knowledge change. And I guess this network is a very clear example of the core things that we believe in, that basically first, knowledge and the research that you're going to be hearing a bit about here, and we have been discussing yesterday and today in the morning, really is about creating these leaders that will bring the change, build the evidence there. So it's a lot about creating this leadership around the world that promotes this change. It's a lot about finding the solutions for problems that are sustainable, that make sense. Find the solutions for problems that are the demands and the needs of people in the developing world. So attune to that specific needs, find the solutions that are sustainable and will endure the time. And finally, also to create the networks and the connections. And we heard a lot yesterday, particularly the importance of the collaboration and the peer learning and the learning among the group during the process. And I think that these networks and leveraging these networks and expand and build this collaboration. And of course, you are all here because you're also somehow part of this network, that we are sharing this knowledge and we want to continue developing the knowledge and this movement around how to bring development and have an impact through open data. So I'll pass it over to you, Tim. And thank you very much for coming. And I do encourage you all to participate and engage with all the amazing researchers that have been participating on this project.
Thank you, and I'll extend my welcome as well. My name is Tim Davies. I've been the research coordinator for this project, and it's been an absolute pleasure to work with researchers from across the world in exploring what open data means in developing countries and how it works. As Josema said, I'm the person who might have a few slides. The trouble being the webcam captures here, so welcome to those on our webcast. And I have to try and press buttons from over there, so I'll be dashing back and forwards oddly as I do this. So our goals today are to share emerging findings from the network, to hear about the research that's taking place, and to explore the connections between research and practice. And in the middle of this day or in the middle of the afternoon, also hear from you and find chances for connections with the other research going on in this room. So it's not just the 17 different projects from 13 different countries we've brought here that we want to hear from. We also want to hear and make connections with the other research work going on. So we're going to do that by some overview of the research process, looking at 3 panels. I've got this slightly wrong on these slides, but we've got 3 panels for you. And in the middle, we've got a poster session with coffee and a chance to really have extended conversations together. So to tell you a brief bit about the ODDC network and its history, as has been said, we had a number of years building up to this. Back in July 2012, we put out an open call for researchers to do work on the emerging impacts of open data. We thought we'd get maybe 10, 15, 20 proposals, and we got 100 different proposals from across the developing world saying we want to research how open data is being used. And we picked 17 of those, and they've spent the last year working on exploratory case study research, unpacking how open data dynamics are working, where they are. And that's where we are today at the end of that first phase, building towards doing more synthesis, more strategic research to build on those findings. So that gives you a sense of where we are right now. That network come from right across the world. They represent these many different organizations. And as part of that work, we've also been exploring macro level views of open data across the world through the Open Data Barometer. I'm not going to say too much about that now. What I will mention is the shared framework we've been trying to build, and this will come back later in the day, that we said we've got very diverse contexts, looking at countries from Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Argentina, India, all across the globe with different backgrounds, but we want to try and bring our research together. So we said we'll look at these different elements: the context for open data, the supply, the technical platforms, the specific issues it can be used to address, intermediaries and use and impact. And this was something we drew up a year and a half ago to try and frame our research, and we've been really exploring and reshaping that over the last few days, which we'll come back to later. But without any further introduction to the project, I think it's better to hear from the participants. And so I'm going to hand over to Jose for our first panel, which is going to be exploring research and capacity building. So maybe the panelists for that can come up too.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Tim. So I'm going to get 4 people, 4 researchers from the network to join me on stage. Emmanuel from Sierra Leone. Please, where is it? Ome from Nigeria. Zach from Kenya. And Giselle from Brazil. So during this first panel, we will try to tell you a little bit more about how, not only how it got started, Tim already mentioned that, but about this journey that we mentioned, a couple of times already, that is so important to many of us, including the ones that were in some sort of positions managing the project, also leading research projects in countries like the 4 that are represented here. And has been a really enriching process for all of us professionally and personally. We have selected, these 4 cases as a start to give you an idea of not only of our journey, the one of the foundation or the IDRC, but also the journey of the researchers themselves. In some of the cases, we took the decision like October 2012, roughly November 2012, when we were selecting these proposals that Tim mentioned before, on how we should allocate, the research in terms of geographically speaking, in terms of capacities, etc. And something that we realized is that there were not so many capacities in terms of open data in the developing world, but that one of the goals of this project was to build those capacities. So we wanted also to fund not only, organizations that had dealt with open data in the past, but organizations that had something to say in a particular sector or area, and that they were keen on being engaged on projects like this to learn more about how open data can make them more efficient in achieving their goals. And that is something that has been key for the project itself. And these 4 cases represent a little bit of the story of the project and how some of the organizations have been acquiring those skills and how they've been applying those to their actual research to produce interesting outcomes that they will explain in a little while. So I will go one by one, introducing you to the cases. They will tell you a little bit more about their own cases, and then we will have an open discussion with you if you want to ask further questions or offer your personal, insights about what you are interested in that particular case, or how it relates to your work, because as we said, we know that many of you are working on similar issues already. So the first is Emmanuel from Sierra Leone. Emmanuel has been, an advocate for right to information for a very, very long time. And as many of you know, Sierra Leone passed a quite progressive Freedom of Information Act last year that was introduced at the OGP Summit last year in London with a lot of success. It's very interesting to read and to know about it. But one of the things that Emmanuel has discussed with us and with the whole network is that there is a clear distinction between right to information and open data. And that is something that he has approached, in terms of his RTI work with an open data mindset that has allowed him to influence to a certain extent that law and how he convenes, some of his ideas to the government in a country like Sierra Leone, where, when we were evaluating the cases, and I mentioned this, over the last 2 days, people couldn't even believe that we were about to commission a case of, related to open data in Sierra Leone, because it was very, very early stages. So we did. And I think Emmanuel took a really good advantage of that. And I would love for you to explain a little bit more about your experience, Emmanuel, in Sierra Leone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Emmanuel Abdullahi. I work for the Society for Democratic Initiatives. It's a civil society organization that has been primarily focusing on advocating for the freedom of information law. And this campaign has been going on for 10 years. So we started looking at the open data research when we got the funding from the World wide foundation, and realized that there is actually a lot of similarities between the Freedom of Information campaign and the open data, particularly so when it has to do with proactive dissemination. Inadvertently, when civil society drafted the Freedom of Information law, we had an extensive provision on proactive publications, and also in terms of how the formatting in which government or public officials can release information. And as a result of that, when the open data research started in Sierra Leone, it almost became an, initially it was kind of a confusion between activists saying, look, I mean, we're talking about access to information. What is so new about this new concept of open data? And at the time when we introduced open data stuff, it was relatively new. So it became um, a project point for us to begin to educate people about the similarities and relationship between open data and freedom of information and how they could complement each other. And I think this has led to a lot of development in the past 1 year, because we just passed the Freedom of Information law, and the government was trying to set up the Information Commission. During one of our trainings, where we were trying to train information officers, we had the IDRC Web Foundation mentor who is from Canada. And part of the training, during the training, he suggested to me and said, look, Emmanuel, don't you think in setting up the Information Commission, you can get one of those commissioners oversee open data? And we had a conversation with government. So eventually, once the organogram of the Information Commission was coming up, one of the commissioners is actually stated to oversee open data. So it's a good blend of looking at how we can incorporate open data into an FOI framework, considering the fact that you have the kind of enforcement ability in the freedom of information, and then you have the technological aspect in the open data aspect of making information available. That's one of the greatest success of our project, because now we have a whole commissioner in the Information Commission partnering with other institutions to do open data. Additionally, I think part of our training, part of our project was to test our methodology with various stakeholders. And over the year of our research, we've been having various government departments like the Mines and Minerals Agency, the Open Government Initiative. We've been having them part of our methodology workshops. Now, what we've realized, again, like I said yesterday, I don't want to be big-headed to take any credit for anything. But over the years, most of these departments have pushed into implementing or trying to learn more about open data issues. Whether advertently or inadvertently, our research could have contributed to that, but we had introduced the concepts to them. And the government has been putting a lot of people on study tour. So for example, 15 days ago, government went to Philippines, and I was asked to join the delegation because they thought, oh, you guys are doing open data, you understand these issues. And Philippines is a case study. Some of our other colleagues were also in England. So you will see that there are a lot of kind of dynamics and interaction now going on about open data issue. I even realized a few hours back that the government delegation is on its way coming here, just to make sure that they learn about this process. So in terms of that interaction, I think we're all trying to look at now how we can create a very good synergy between the access to information community and the open data people.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you very much. So you have highlighted something that I forgot to mention that is also very, very important for the project, which is the network of mentors that we put together for the project. So the way the project works is that because of this identification of the need to build this skill set in some of the organizations, we put together a network of people that were supporting all these cases, both on the research capabilities and on their open data capabilities. And they've been doing some trips in the field to work directly with them, participate in some workshops, etc., and then mentoring at a distance, reviewing their research findings, reviewing their preliminary reports and data that they were collecting, so they could be more efficient in how to deal with that. And that was, also one of the things that we are most proud of as part of the project itself. So thanks for highlighting that. So the next speaker will be Ome from the University of Ilorin in Nigeria. So as Emmanuel said, he represents a civil society organization. Ome represents a university. So independent academics and researchers from Nigeria. And I would love for you to explain a little bit about the learning and discovery process that you have gone through and your team doing the project so far.
Thank you. Um, I'm Ome from University of Ilorin, Nigeria. I am an academician and I lead the team of researchers working on investigation of the use of Nigeria's online budget data. Now, at the beginning of the process, when we sent in a concept note, we know that usually we work with data, we analyze data, and we did the best we could to put in a concept note. And then the model of the World Wide Web Foundation, which was to add on peer supporters, stroke mentors. At that time, we didn't really know what it meant and how that would pan out. But when we were writing the full proposal, we saw the effect of having a peer supporter with us because he was able to lead us gently to things that we needed to add to make the proposal richer in terms of literature, in terms of gaps in our proposal, and that was very, very useful. Down the line, when we started executing the project, one of the things we found really different from other funders was that we were given the room to include things that we were learning and finding out in execution of our projects. So that, for example, when our research coordinator and peer supporter made us to realize that there was something called data hackathons. As university academicians, we were quite interested because we have students who we know would like to participate in such an event. And we're quite happy that the foundation allowed us to carve out something to be able to give some little prize money. And we organized such a hackathon amongst some university teams. And that was a first for the Nigerian environment, and also hacking into Nigeria's budget data. That was a first as well. So that was something that we are really proud of to have. And then we also found that the foundation has the international links to knowing what is happening in the international scene. For example, what the World Bank is doing as it affects Nigeria in the open government, open data scene. And they connected us with that scenario in Nigeria. So we're actually part of the process of having an open government data portal for Nigeria. So we actually found this very different from other research projects where you are forced to stay within the guidelines of your proposal, doing purely looking for results against your objectives of study. We liked this aspect of being able to include things that we were learning as part of the process.
Thank you very much, Ome. So the next person that I want to introduce is Zach. One of the things that we discussed a number of times also within the network is the importance of the data itself and the different approaches that we have in terms of research here in the project, in contrast to some of the initiatives we've been seeing emerging worldwide, with a lot of emphasis on, in some cases, on technology and even on the open data portals themselves. We have looked at with a critical eye of some of these things and see how data itself can improve people's lives. And one of the most interesting cases also as part of the network is Zach's organization case, because as many of you know, the Kenyan Open Data Initiative was a big launch in Africa, probably the first big open data initiative in the continent. But we wanted to look well beyond the Kenyan Open Data Initiative itself and the portal itself. And Zach's organization proposal was about researching how data itself can improve the lives of people in urban slums and rural settlements across the country, and what importance can it have for the actual people living in the country. And that is something that he focused on a lot, and we learned a lot about the process and also about the role of the different, intermediaries and providers of information other than government. Can you explain a little bit more, Zach?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zakaria Chiliso. I work for an organization called Jesuit Akimani Center. As Jose says, our focus was to look at what impact open data can have in lives of people. One, on service delivery, second, on civic engagement. And us being a center for justice and peace, which works on how communities that are in the margins of society engage with the governments and engage with other public institutions, this was quite a motivation enough to get us involved in this particular project. Now, when you look at the debates that have been going around the world about open data, the temptation is to think about open data to be synonymous with the online portals. But when we try to investigate the debates or the agenda of open data from the communities that are on the margins, you realize that actually open data open data or portals, online portals, just emerge as one of the sources. That there are so many other sources that people go for information. And this was a discovery, and that's when we started talking about the landscape of open data. And we are talking about communities that are digitally marginalized. We are talking about people who rely on more or less on traditional infrastructure. And this is something that this project has helped us to discover. Why? Because when we look at the debates around open data, we are asking how can open data be transformed into service delivery? How can open data be transformed into civic engagement? Now we ask ourselves, how can someone who lives in a slum, urban slum, or in rural settlement use data that is published by public institutions to engage with these politicians, policymakers, or businesses, or seek services? So this is a very critical question on our subject. And one of the discoveries we made is that actually people seek information or data from multiple sources. And this is when for instance, if you go to urban slums, you find that the offices of the administrators, the religious centers become a very critical player in access to information. As much as we have the portals, you find that because of lack of technology, lack of the reach, these people are kind of marginalized, and you're wondering how can this data that is published by the public institutions make impact or influence the lives of these people. So, and then of course we ask about the kind of data that people are looking for. This is a very basic question, is a very critical question. The temptation will be when you push governments to make available data, they just put there whatever they want to put. But is that data relevant to the communities? That's the question that we were trying to investigate and find what kinds of data or what kinds of information people who live in marginalized areas look for. Like you might think that everyone else is interested in budget, so you publish all the budgets that the public institutions can produce. And maybe that's not what people are interested in. Maybe they are looking for data on scholarships or funds that are available for those particular communities. Now, this is a very relevant data. Whether the government understands that, that's something else. So these are some of the things that we actually discovered. When you ask people, where do you look for information, they tell you. What kind of information do you look for? This is the kind of information I look for. So this, I think, this network has enabled us to kind of unravel and also make a contribution to what is already happening at the global level. That when we talk about open data, we have the issue of context, and within the context, there are so many other dynamics that also we need to bring to our debates, and this is very crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach, for highlighting that very interesting case. Our final speaker is Giselle from Brazil. Probably Brazil, among all these countries, is the one that has, the biggest number of open data initiatives so far. Some of them, at the local level, some of the national level over the last couple of years. And I know that Giselle and her team knows them very well. But her group has been focused on making data and information more useful and accessible to people. And I would love to also hear from you what you have learned during the process, and also to expand a little bit more on the role you think that intermediaries should play.
Oh, thank you so much, Jose. And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gisele. I'm professor at the University of São Paulo and also Open Knowledge Brazil board chairwoman. And our process started with budget, yes, open budget, because we are trying to consume data, open budget data in Brazil. As many of you know, we have a very advanced legal framework in order to disclosure open budget, not open, but data about budgetary execution in real time. And our work was to that direction. Is this data accessible or not for the population? So we developed a tool, a civic tool called Caring for My Neighborhood, in order to try to geocode this data, because we thought that it would be more easy to a citizen look to the budget and see what's happening near their school or home and so on. So we have some finds about this experience. The first of all is, despite Brazil has this good legal framework, we don't have a very good data quality. And more than this, today budget concept is about to do some accountancy process. Is not thought for civic engagement. So we need to rethink which elements we could gather in this disclosure in order to make it more closer to the people's demand. So we try to geocode the budget and to show on a map the budgetary execution and to show a status, what is enacted, what is only planned, and went to a community in São Paulo, a marginalized community with some low resources, and try to see if our tool would help them to know a little bit more about these concepts in order to track budget and so on. And I think the most interesting part that I come from computer science field and an open data activism, and to do this I have to understand, interact, and work inside a network of civil society organizations, because I only have the technical aspect of open data, and I have to understand another aspects about that community, about the demand side, and this provoked on our group some deep reflections about the intermediaries' role, because it's a very complex questions how to make information and data accessible, and doing this work together with organizations that work in the grassroots level, that works in this specific thematic or budgetary thematic, working all together, we try to reach the end user, the regular citizen for us. And we saw that geocoding is a very powerful strategy to make budget more near, more closer to the people. And this work, this network, working together not to reach these people could also be a very interesting strategy. So I think Zacharias and all my other colleagues, they are pointing this. So we are in an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary field that we have to look for synergies in this process, because the impact is done by this network, using data, using tools, and so on.
Thank you, Giselle. So we've been touching on some of the aspects of the journey as described at the beginning. But before opening to the floor for questions, I would like to ask them, one additional question each that they can respond, very quickly in like, a minute or so, because they haven't talked much about their particular specific, research projects. And you have the posters around, so you can learn a little bit more about some of these projects, and they are summarized there. Of course, we will be, publishing all the reports in the next few days. Some of them have been published already, and you will get all the research results and everything that you can look at. It's very, very interesting stuff that we have in there. But I would like all of you to highlight just one insight that of your project, and what are you planning as a next step? So, Emmanuel, in your case.
Thank you very much. I think quickly in our research, what we found out is that the similarly accepted definition of open data is quite restrictive, and it's leaving out quite a number of people. Because if you begin to look at standards like machine readable, it's leaving out the bottom billion in the digital divide. So for example, in Sierra Leone, most of the people who make use of information or who use intermediaries are not getting it from the website or portals. They're getting it from local content. You have, for example, the local government law in Sierra Leone that mandates local councils to put up information on notice boards in communities and wards. This is where journalists and civil society get information and relate to the people through radio stations. So they don't use applications. So if you begin to look at PDF format, machine readables, then you are putting out the bottom billion. And I think it's a very important thing to begin to look at. You're looking at the conceptualization. For Sierra Leone, I think Sierra Leone has created a relationship between, well, there's been a relationship, but this has been enforced in Sierra Leone between open data and access to information. And I think we need to look at this more at the global level, because there seems to be a division between access to information practitioners and open data people, and some amount of tension. And I think it's something to look forward. Sierra Leone has just developed the OGP National Action Plan, and fortunately, we were part of this drafting committee, and we have put together a huge open data component. And I think one of the things that we should look at is how to take that forward into transforming a little research like we have done and the efforts of government into put into a national and holistic program. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel.
Okay. Now for our research, one of the findings was that the formats in which various stakeholders wanted the data was different across the stakeholders. So that, for example, members of the media professionals told us that they wanted to see open data as PDF files, whereas many of the civil society said they wanted to see this data as machine readable files, but specifically they actually picked Excel. We had given the option of Excel, SQL, and other options for the machine readable formats, and they picked Excel. So we see that also government officers, the government officers on the supply side, those who generate the budget, were the ones that actually picked CSV as a better option for them, whereas government officers who use the data from other agencies picked PDF. So we see that as a window to do some capacity building in the future, in order to also educate them, because many of the government officers who have data said they didn't want to make that data open in any other format other than PDF, because they felt that citizens would go and start changing numbers on such data. So we see all this as opportunity for capacity building in the future.
Thank you very much, Ome.
One of the things that emerged from our study, and it was quite an insight, though it sounds very obvious to people when you tell them that it's the motivation that people have when they seek open data, and there's a dichotomy in their motivations. There are those that are motivated by service delivery, and there are those that are motivated by accountability. And these are two things that are competing when we talk about open data. When you ask people what they do with information, or the data that they acquired from the portal, they have a varied responses to that question. Someone said, "Oh, I wanted to apply for scholarship." Another one says, "I wanted to see how schools are performing." The other one says, "Oh, I wanted to help the youth to engage with the government." So you see, these are all varied responses to a question, and this is something that we discovered when we were doing our study. Now, if we want to ask further question regarding this dichotomy, it will be about the intermediaries that are playing a critical role in translating this data to deliver these motivations. For instance, we have intermediaries that will help the citizen to engage with the government. There are intermediaries that will help citizen access services, and this is all within the open data. So this was one of the biggest discoveries in our case, though it sounds very obvious. Then the question of capacity comes into play. That, for instance, you go to the office of the local administrator, the question you'll be asking yourself whether they have capacity to help achieve these goals of open data. That is one of the questions that we're asking, and that is something that we would want to further probe, particularly to understand their economy around open data in that particular centers. How do they operate? How can we optimize in whatever they are doing, so that we can realize the objectives of open data that the government is trying to make available to the people?
Yeah, thank you very much, Zach. Isabel.
Thank you. So, despite we have chosen to act in a bottom-up way, we have some important outcomes, and that gave us some opportunities. And the first one is that São Paulo Municipal Public Administration invited us in the first moment to replicate our tool, and then they found that it was not possible, because even they don't have enough detail to do this. So now we are working together in order to understand the process of elaborating and tracking the expenditure inside public administration. So we have a memorandum of understanding with São Paulo, and I will talk later about this on OK Fast session, about Transparent City OK Fast session. And another outcome is that our tool, and another one related to open spending, customized to Brazil case. These both tools have won Google Prize, Google Global Impact Challenge Prize, and now we are developing not a tool but a whole project, and find ways to make it sustainable. We have Google support to do this, and it will open a new dimension, a very different dimension, because I come from academia and also open data activist, and I'm starting to see how to make a project sustainable, interesting, how to communicate this, how to replicate this, and so on. And it's a whole new world for me, at least. And also in the research, I'd like to see we'd like to see a little bit more the intermediaries' role in this whole contest, the intermediaries ecosystem for open data, and we will also have a OK Fast session about these ground up intermediaries.
Great, thank you very much, Giselle. Okay, so we have some minutes for questions. I don't know how we're doing on time. Like 10 minutes? Okay, we started late, so sorry about that. We will try to catch up. So if you have a question, please let us know so we can bring one of the mics to you so the people on the other side of the live stream can also hear you. And I would appreciate if you could say your name and affiliation, if any, and then ask your question.
Those at the back, there's some seats at the front.
There are seats at the front, yeah.
First crack. My name is Christopher Wilson. I'm from an NGO called the Engine Room, for the gentleman from Kenya. I'm just curious, once you discovered what kinds of information people living in the slums were actually interested in, have you had a chance to present that to the people in government who manage open data, and what kind of response did you get?
Thank you. Of course, when we were releasing our findings, we invited the government people, particularly people from the Ministry of Information and Communication, and of course we invited politicians to the session, and we were telling them, look, this is the kind of information people are looking for, and it would be very appropriate if we could have mechanisms within your systems that can enable people to access this kind of information. And at least from the responses we got immediately, they were like, yeah, this is kind of support that we would need. And of course, our partner, our colleague from the iHub, we were invited to go and meet with the Ministry of Communication to discuss further our studies and our findings and see ways of how to actualize some of these proposals. I hope I've answered your question.
Commitments or indicated that they're able or interested in providing that kind of information? I believe the Kenyan open data efforts have largely been characterized by institutional limitations, difficulty of supplying data over time. I would imagine that there's a very specific capacity challenge to providing that kind of information.
Yeah, at least to the extent that the representative from the government who came invited us to make a formal presentation to the ministry, that we would say that it was a positive feedback at that particular session. But how it pans out is something that at the moment we cannot really say or make any indications to.
Hi, Kat Townsend from USAID, so US government. And I'm just curious, other than opening data, making it available, enacting our own open data policies, what would be most useful for, like, what's a useful role for the US government to provide in this space?
Of course, what is useful in this case is the conversation that is going on. It's an agenda that has been on the margins, but the fact that we have brought it to the public domain and through this network, and not only in particular geographical areas, but it's cutting across the global south, it's very important. And the hope and the optimism that we have is that we can carry forward this kind of discourse into every other sectors, particularly within the universities and government and private sectors, so that we begin seeing open data beyond what already has been defined, and see whether different geographical areas could have a different perspectives that really needs to be brought to this kind of discussions that we are having now.
I think I think yesterday we were able to look at what next for these researchers. You know, for me and most of us working in civil society, it's not just about producing researches. It's about transforming those researches into tangible and practical things that will affect the lives of the people. So I think one of the things that could be looked at is those action plans that were developed yesterday. There are a couple of others that we developed today in clusters about how to take this forward. So for example, when we talked about blending the open data and access to information community. We talked about having to bring together all the stakeholders, practitioners, academia, to begin to interact. How do we do these things in various regions, not just Africa? I mean, the people in Latin America and the Caribbean that will want to look at this issue. So I think with USAID and the US government, particularly so when you're championing the OGP and open data is part of it, it's about going into the practical aspect of making sure that people benefit from concepts like open data and not just for the elites. Thank you.
I think open data policies in general, for sure. Sometimes I feel that we discuss too much about disclosure, and we should look to all the chain. And I hope to see in the near future more discussion about how to build and maintain innovations around open data, and not only to how to disclose, but the whole chain, to consume, to build applications, to build sustainable models and initiatives. And I think we are in the early stage.
Just one more thing is about, actually this was again in our debate yesterday, is about whether open data should be brought to the global debates, perhaps in the post 2015. And the question is about the frameworks. And of course we are concerned about the issues of sustainability. If you look at the open data debates that are going on, some of the responses we've had from countries is just because they want to look nice. So they put up a portal, but nothing much happens. So the question of sustainability of open data is quite something that we are very much concerned about. And this will be very useful discussions if they are brought within the development sector, organizations that are working on some of these real critical areas of countries and continents.
Okay, I think I would like to add though that this also gives opportunity in, say, a developing country where we have informatics related programs. I find that this is actually a very good way of challenging the youth in the universities, it could even be secondary schools, to work with tools that are global. So, for example, in my university, there's a lot of engagement by the students and faculty in now building applications, visualizations. So they are reading a lot about this and asking questions. I know that team has had to respond to quite a number of the graduate students asking questions. So I think it's a good way of bridging the digital divide in a really practical and way with the depth that is needed in the technical gap as well.
So thank you very much. So we still have time for one last question. We will have, again, plenty of time. You know, we are booking, I think, roughly an hour, so for you to look at the posters and interact with the researchers and have coffee, etc. But let's take one last question for this session.
My question is for Gisele. I have a question more about the human aspect of your research, about how people react to the app that you developed at the community, because we know there is some kind of a magic when you're processing the data, and budget data is very hard for a common person. So when they saw themselves in the territory, what you can share with us about that?
Oh, many stories to tell, many stories. I think it changed my mind completely. Yes, because sometimes open data is only a starting point to talk about almost everything. And sometimes in some communities, I feel that they only want to be listened, not to talk about budget, but look, listen to me. I'd like to talk to you, and that is very different from my perspective, because I came from academia and read and write papers, and in another moment I was in a church room teaching budgetary concepts to 100 people and local leaders and so on, and they told me so many stories, and I realized that open budget data should evolve, because budget is not for accountants, not only for accountants, but it should, these stories should tell these stories, and people should be reflected by them, and two-way change. I think somehow we change them, and they deeply change us in this process of building an application and also testing it with that community.
Okay. Thank you very much, Giselle. Okay, so we run out of time for this session. Thank you very much for your participation, and thanks very much for your questions. I hand it over to Tim for the next session.
Thank you all. So I think there's such value in the discussion. I'm going to leave any extra slides till later today, and we're going to move fairly swiftly to our next panel. But as that will leave you sitting for a while, I thought what I should ask you to do while the next panel with Maurice are coming up is turn to the person next to you, or if you feel you need to get up and move a bit, maybe swap seats with the person next to you so you're sitting next to some new people, and talk about what for you is the value of research. Because we've heard about research and capacity building and so on, but that's a question to ask now and for discussion later on while the panel are coming up. So 2 minutes to talk, and then I'll try and get everyone back together, which will be impossible. So for the folk on the live cast, if you want to tweet your thoughts on what research means to you, just use the ODDC hashtag. We'll be reconvening shortly. You'll also see on the ODDC tag on Twitter links to an Etherpad where you can share your notes and thoughts on the session taking place. Okay, so there'll never be enough time for those conversations right now, but we'll have that extended break shortly. So if you grab your seats again, our panel will take their seats as well here, and I will hand over to Maurice McNaughton to present. So please do take your seats again. Hopefully you've just met someone new and you've got conversations you can carry on later on, and answers to that question on the value of research as well. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Maurice. Maurice has been one of the mentors in our research network. As Josema mentioned, we've had a number of mentors offering their support, spending time with projects, and that's been an absolutely invaluable part of the process. So thanks to all of those mentors, but I'll hand over to Maurice for our panel now.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. Good afternoon again, colleagues. Tim said, my name is Maurice McNaughton. I'm from the Mona School of Business and Management at the University of the West Indies. So I'm based in Kingston, Jamaica. And as we continue to share insights from the rich set of case studies that are part of this ODDC program and this network, really a pleasure for me to invite this panel and my colleagues here to talk a little bit this panel will address the theme of how do we make open data meaningful to the ordinary mortal, the average citizen. And most of you, I think, here, based on your interest, would have been involved in the global open data conversation in some form or the other. And I'm sure you'd appreciate that when that conversation goes outside of the immediate research community or the immediate practitioner community, it can become a quite abstract idea for many people. And often it is not accessible to the average man in the street who could care less. I mean, he's often completely oblivious to the idea of how many data sets has my government published. That means nothing to him. So for this panel, we explore the theme, how to make open data meaningful to the average citizen. And I have with me 3 of the case studies from the ODDC network. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, name locale, and speak a little bit about each of their projects before we get into the main questions. So let me start with you, Satyarupa.
Thanks, Maurice. Good afternoon. I'm Satyarupa Shekhar. I work with a group called Transparent Chennai. It's an action research project based in Chennai in South India. And what we do is we use data and technology to advocate for improvements in urban governance. Transparent Chennai works with a wide range of stakeholders. We work with the government, we work with the urban poor, we work with middle-class residents, with media, and with civil society organizations. What we are trying to do in Chennai is actually trying to create a lot of data that can be used to advocate for improved access to services. And our main objective is to actually embed capacity within these stakeholders to actually use this data, to create the data themselves. We focus a lot on neglected issues. So what Transparent Chennai does is actually works on issues like water, sanitation, on slums and informal settlements, and the role of elected representatives. We also work on waste management and pedestrian infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much. And our second panelist, Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Cañares. I come from Step Up Consulting based in the Philippines. It's a social enterprise organized essentially to deal with research and capacity building on subnational governance as well as subnational development. So the research project that I'm working on now is like it's looking at the changes that have been this has evolved as a consequence of making data open in the context of local governments.
Thank you, Michael. And then finally, Ricardo from the country that just ran the most successful football World Cup in history. They didn't win, but anyway, Ricardo.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Ricardo Mateus from Brazil. And our work, we tried to figure it out what happened in Latin America in 3 countries. My colleague here, Fabrizio Scrolini, did the case study in Montevideo, Uruguay. And my other colleague here, Silvana Fumega, did the case study in Argentina. And we from Brazil, we did 2 case studies in São Paulo on the legislative open data portal and the Rio de Janeiro City Hall open data portal.
Okay, thank you very much, Ricardo. So I'm going to start with an essential question for each of you. And let me start with you, Satyarupa. So you've used, in your project, you've looked at open data in a specific service context. And so the thing that we're trying to address here is, how do we make this meaningful to the average citizen? So talk a little bit about how your work addressed the issue of, well, who are the key stakeholders in this picture? What is important to them as far as data is concerned? And how do they make use of that data to improve the circumstances as far as services are concerned?
So within the research project, what Transparent Chennai did was actually step back from the question of open data. What we wanted to do was actually look at the state of data on 3 municipal services and look at the implications of that state of data on the demand for open data, right? So the kind of question that we were asking was that, is there adequate data? What is the quality of data that exists within municipal agencies that are tasked with providing basic services to residents of Chennai, do we have adequate data to actually plan and monitor that access? And if we don't, then are we just going to ask them to open up the data and perhaps reinforce existing inequities, right? So our project, what we did was we looked at water, sanitation, and public health. I'll give you just two examples of how we went about collecting and creating the data. What we did was in one slum in the city, we actually got residents of that slum to collect and create data on the state of public toilets and water, access to water, and using paper maps. What we then did was we digitized these maps and provided these large A0 maps back to the residents of that slum. And we also created forums in which these residents could then interact with their elected representative to hold those elected representatives actually accountable for the state of services in their ward or in their neighborhood. So the important thing there was that residents, we didn't just say, create data. We actually innovated on a kind of methodology, provided them a kind of a tool to create that data. And then we also created a forum in which they could use that data for advocating for improved services. The other example that I'd like to talk about is our work with the local city government. We worked on with local engineers, with street level bureaucrats, on creating data on where public toilets could be located. So what the city government was actually going to do was come out with a tender document where it was going to invite contractors to install and maintain public toilets in the city. And this was important because our research showed that there were inadequate public sanitation facilities in the city. Data showed that very few people in the city actually had private sanitation facilities. So there was an obvious need for public sanitation facilities. We got local, the junior engineers, to actually go out and survey locations based on where there could be a potential need, which is where are there informal markets located? Are there institutional, large institutional hubs or transport hubs where there is an obvious need for toilets, where there are large transient populations, and where there are adequate infrastructures to install these toilets. Now, what might be sort of not very significant for most countries is why do we actually need to spend so much energy in creating this data? So the context within which we worked is that it's a very data poor context, right? Oh, okay. I was wondering why the audience was actually looking behind me and not at me. Okay. Yeah. So we use some of these methodologies to collect and create this data. And basically what we did with the junior engineers was we created very simple forms that they could use on mobile phones. This was already an innovation because currently how the local government creates data is using several kinds of registers, ledgers, books, basically paper-based. And some of that data gets digitized and enters into on a computer. Sometimes that computer is connected to an internet, and sometimes data is shared between different agencies or different departments. So the point was actually, can we actually create data? Can we make it open? Can we use more open source tools by which the government could actually create this data? So here in the second case where we're talking about public toilets, we actually worked with government officials to embed within the government the capacity to collect this data. This was very important because now what's happened is it was work on just one asset, which was public toilets. But now what the government is doing is actually using this as a template to plan and monitor other kinds of services in the city. So how do they maintain parks and other buildings? I'm sorry, Silvana's asking me to end right now, so I'm going to pass the mic.
Thank you. Timekeeper here. But in essence, what you're saying here is that your intervention created a value proposition both on the supply side with the city as well as on the demand side in terms of open data. And so that's really interesting. We're going to move to Michael. In the case of the Philippines, although there's not at present a rights to information legislation, but the government has mandated the implementation of what you call full disclosure policy, so that local government is required to post financial and procurement related information on their website. So I don't know if in that sense that's a proxy for not having rights to information, but your project, talk a little bit about your project and how you looked at the impact of that full disclosure policy.
Okay, so the Philippines is a land of contradiction in terms of open data and open government. It's one of those pioneering countries that signed the Open Government Partnership, but it has a Freedom of Information bill which has been sitting in Congress for 27 years now. And they're hopeful that they'll be able to pass it in the next session, but I don't know, I'm not very optimistic about that. So, much of the intervention on open data and open government is done at the national level, and the question is how to bring that kind of an initiative to the local level. So the Department of Interior and Local Government, sometime in 2011, devised what they referred to as the full disclosure policy, which requires governments, local government units, and this means in the context of the Philippines with the decentralized governance, provinces, cities, and municipalities, to disclose information online on the websites, as well as in the full disclosure policy portal of the Philippine government. Certain information on budgets, procurement, and financial reports, what we refer to as the easy to disclose reports, not so very much political and prepared on a regular basis. And the advantage of this is in the absence of a Freedom of Information Act, when people would like to know where the budget is and where the money is going to, then you have something like somehow a default mode, like a portal or an information that is posted online that's available for people to look at, to consult, and also to essentially make questions about if they wanted to. Now, what are the challenges for this kind of a context? So in the Philippines, for example, there's a digital divide with 36% internet penetration, I think, as of the last year. And also, essentially, that's though there is, what we found out in the research is, even though there's a supply of data at one end, it doesn't necessarily translate to impact altogether, automatically. So like we see that there are hurdles to that generation of an impact. And the first one would be awareness. Do civil society organizations, for example, business community, journalists, and academic researchers know that the data exists? Apparently in the research sites that we were studying, only 15% are aware. Because in the process, the government is essentially putting out data into the public domain, but then it's not coupled with a very effective mechanism for communicating that such data is available. The second hurdle that we identified is essentially the interest. Apparently, the kind of data that is provided by the government, what I can refer to as the easy parts, are those that are not of interest to the people. So echoing also the kind of things that Zach and the other panels, speakers in the previous panel were saying. So budget is there, but they're not interested about the budget. They're interested about where the projects are, how much money is allocated, who is the contractor for that, when is it supposed to begin, and when is it supposed to end, and so on and so forth. So, and the last one is the understanding part, which is quite a little bit tricky because, you know, I mean, at one end, to put information into the public, like financial reports, is good. But then you have to have some kind of a certain level of capacity to understand that. I'm a certified public accountant in my previous life, so if I can look at that data, then I get to understand. But that's not, that kind of a skill is not available to anyone. So the question there within this context is, if you talk about open data, for example, and putting open data into the practice sphere, the question would be, how much of that is a replication of the current development practices wherein, you know, there's an equal access, there's an equal opportunity, there's an equal kind of, how do you call it, entitlement or a claim to that entitlement that happens in communities. So.
Interesting. And Ricardo, and you mentioned your project being one of several case studies looking at open data at the city level. I mean, talk a little bit, and you mentioned to me just before we came up that Brazil has perhaps the second largest open data portal behind data.gov. I don't know if anyone wants to challenge that.
Yeah. Yes.
In terms of numbers of data sets.
Yes.
But anyway, talk a little bit about how this has impacted a range of stakeholders, citizens, businesses, enterprise, media. Just
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that experience.
That's it's true. We actually what happens. I don't know if you know our mayor, Eduardo Paes. He's always challenging us. He asked to us kick the ball before asking me because I want the people have improvement at the services. So we started to build the open data portal with 50, 100, 2000. Then we have in 3 months more than 30,000 data sets, some of them in real time. And in accordance of my accountability, federal government of United States has around 90,000, and our bet is to achieve this number until December. But a lot of open data that, in fact, people are now asking us. For example, the journalists. We have in real time the GPS of the buses, and they started to use this data to control us, to check what kind of service we are delivering to the population. And it was a big headline, including the mayor screamed with me, but it was about the night buses. Some enterprises, they should have nine buses, but they in fact had just one bus. So he screamed with me, but it's good because we now know that we need to improve that and ask for the enterprise to improve the service. The other week, another headline talk about the velocity of those drivers. They were more than limit, around 100 kilometers. So we discovered who was not in accordance with our law, and then we asked it again to the enterprise. Hey, check, please. They are not in accordance.
Excellent. I know you have some fascinating stories about how citizens are contributing to that open data portal in real time through a number of apps that you mentioned to me. So perhaps you can discuss that with afterwards. But I have one more question for the panel before we turn it over to the audience. I think in each of your specific cases, intermediaries have played a particular role, whether it's bridging the gap between consumers and producers or between state and citizen. I'm going to ask each of you to just touch on the significance and the role of intermediaries in each of your projects.
Do you want to go first? I'll go first. Sorry. So in Chennai, Transparent Chennai basically wears several hats. One of them is as a data intermediary. What we try and do is try and access data from different government agencies and put that in easy to use formats and make them available to residents of the city. The other is to try and fill certain data gaps. So accessing data from the government, we've been looking at certain kinds of data sets that come out, and we try and identify how those that data set could be improved, and trying to identify which stakeholder actually is best placed to collect or fill up that gap. So sometimes, even if it's a data set from the government might not be best placed to actually fill that data set. It could be actually something that citizens are better placed to do. So for example, in the use of public toilets, and I'm sorry, it's a very unsavory topic, but Transparent Chennai has actually done a lot of work on public toilets. We found that the users of the public toilet are actually better placed to give information on how usable a public toilet is. And that's not something that the local government used to collect, right? So that's something that we've done. And as a data intermediary, we're also trying to innovate on tools and methodologies that different kinds of stakeholders could use. So we are very cognizant of the fact that internet penetration is very low. And a lot of the people that we work with actually live in slums, are homeless, but they still have a lot of valuable data that's very, very critical to planning how the city is shaped, right? So trying to innovate on the tools and methodologies to collect that data, most often using paper maps, internalizing a lot of the digitizing costs, and ensuring that technology is actually not the barrier to participation in local governance. So that's the third kind of role that we play as an intermediary.
Yeah, and one of the things we spoke about earlier today is the way that intermediaries evolve. So that you've become now a full-fledged partner of the city, right, through an MOU of sorts.
That's right, 2 MOUs actually, and there's a city government officer who's sitting right here. Maybe some of you can chat with them about his experience or the government's experience in working with us, the data intermediary.
Yeah. And Michael, you mentioned the significant digital divide between what is put out there and the capacity, you know, so.
Yeah, I would also like to say something about interest, because like interest could probably be sparked by the format. Because in the research, for example, that we had, I told you that they were not interested in the budget. They're interested about the budget use. We presented to them the PDF file, which says all those sorts of things about where the money is going to, and a certain file with visualization in it. And the reaction is 100% positive for this file with visualization. And then people were saying, how come the office of the provincial governor has the same budget as the provincial general hospital? So that kind of a reaction, you did not get that with looking at the PDF file. So which practically pushes you to think about the role of intermediaries in not only making that data more interesting, but at the same time more understandable for people. And I would also like to highlight the fact that there's a need, for example, for offline citizen engagement with the data. Because oftentimes we think about intermediaries converting into something visual, but at the same time putting that on the web. So I think what Transparent Chennai is doing with all these maps, for example, is making this data more real and accessible.
And Ricardo, you're at 30,000, soon to be 90,000, if I go by what you said. Who's reusing this? I mean, who are the persons that are now taking this and creating secondary derivative products or apps or visualizations from this?
This is an interesting question. Further the journalists that have been using, we also have partnerships with some enterprise that we give information, this open information, and they also give us some information to help us to improve the urban mobility. So Rio de Janeiro was the final place of World Cup, and we were concerned about urban mobility, but everything went well. Part of this was the usage of open data. Without the open data and big data tools to create very well urban mobility, we couldn't that. For example, I don't know if you know the social GPS Waze and Move It. We exchange information, and for example, if a street is blocked, we send information in real time because we have a center of operations and we know what's happened on the city. We have sensors over the city. We send the information to the app, the enterprise, and they put this information in real time at the application. So the GPS change the road in real time, and the citizen don't get lost. For the buses, for example, if you are a tourist and you are using the Move It, you can say to us through the application that the driver is fasting or he's doing something wrong, and we can act in any way. However, we don't have too much hacker and geek people to work with this data. We are trying to build a capacity skills for those people that are interested, like NGO scholars, data scientists, basically, to work with our data, and we didn't have had time enough because the World Cup and other thing else. But actually, I'm tired. You can see from my voice, but we will do that to improve the skills of people using our data to to give the chance of what is wrong on the seat and how we could do better in Rio de Janeiro. That's it.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, Tim tells me we have 15 minutes or so left. So let me open it up to the audience and just invite questions from you for any of our three panelists.
I could just shout too. My name is Eva. I work for Internews, and I have a question about toilets. And what my question is basically, it's how do we get it? Why should citizens care about data? And I think something that we sometimes assume is that in developing countries there is expectation of civic engagement, which maybe there isn't a history of. Like maybe they don't think when they elect a local leader and he doesn't provide a service that they should elect him out. Like that sort of thought process, that sort of democratic expectation might not be there. And I think that's a hurdle for citizen engagement with data that we haven't done a very good job of addressing. And that's why things like, apps like Find My School apps, there's very low uptakes for things like that, because that's not, people don't go to data to make decisions. They talk to their community leader, or they go to a trusted media outlet. So to bring this back to toilets, there's been a lot of international coverage, even just this week, about how malnutrition in India can largely be attributed possibly to lack of toilets, lack of sanitary facilities. So how can you make that, that's an issue that families should care about, right? So is there a mainstream media strategy to get that conversation in the media? Can you visualize that showing, for example, I guess Muslims, there's higher toilet uptake use among Muslims. So can you visualize, look, this is how many, out of this many families, this is how many Muslim families use toilets, and this is how many children out of 5 suffer from malnutrition, versus let's look at a Hindu family, only this many families are using toilets, and this is how many suffer from malnutrition. Like something that like a mother would see that or read that and say, okay, maybe the toilet that someone built for me, I should reconvert it into a toilet instead of a storage closet, which I have it used as now. And then maybe they'll be the ones, like if enough people see that as an issue that affects their lives, then they could be the ones to generate sort of the public demand for policy change. Like basically how can you make people care about that data at a local level, and not just one group at a time, like through mass media or however they're used to communicating, so that there's sort of a demand for policy change from the bottom up, instead of the donors deciding, okay, now all of you need toilets that don't get used, or the government saying, man, toilets are really expensive, maybe next time. So like how do we sort of, yeah, I guess it's a basic question of data access, and how do we get citizens engaged to change policy?
So actually, I'm going to flip that question a little bit. I think what we would want to do is not get them to care about the data, but how do we get or create the data to answer the question that they care about, right? So if, and this we have actually experienced from our interactions with the urban poor in Chennai, they do want sanitation facilities. It's how do we give them enough power and evidence to advocate for that, right? How do we help them make that case with the local city government, with their local elected representative? And it's not just data. It's about getting them to actually think about themselves as a collective. So it's not just an individual. And sometimes infrastructure is actually tied up with larger complicated issues like land rights, right? So in slums, people don't build toilets, not just because they don't want to use toilets, it's because they don't own the land that they are living on, right? So it's not just a simple question of, let's just go and erect another building for toilets. It's about, can you actually do that? And the answer is usually no. So how can we get them to ask the people who can actually install a toilet, right? So it's actually figuring out, there is obviously a need, but how do we get the people who need that facility to advocate with the local government? And there is an additional problem in there, which is that not just that we have forgotten the role of elected representatives, but how do we actually leverage their role as an elected representative to strengthen that case? But also, how do we actually engage with the executive arm, which can actually provide for that toilet and help them navigate this complicated governance landscape, right? So, so for example, land is actually something that's within the Constitution. I mean, in the Constitution, it's a subject of the state government and not the city government. So how do we help the city government actually go and provide an infrastructure facility on something that they are not allowed to take a decision on, right? So it's not really as simple as, can we just create that data and can we create a need for the data? It's about, how can we find these different people to leverage the positions they are in and find the different kinds of data that they need to advocate for that one story that we want to tell. We want more toilets in Chennai. How do we get local elected representatives to say the same thing? How do we get slum dwellers to say the same thing? How do we get the city government to actually talk to all of these people, right? And it's not just a simple question of recalling our elected representative, which by law is not allowed in India. But if they're elected every 5 years, in between those 5 years, how do we actually get them to be responsible and deliver what they're responsible for, right? So creating the forum in which they act as a collective.
Hello, my name is Claudia Schwegmann from Open Knowledge Germany. I have a question about scale. My impression is that many of these projects, and I would call them social accountability projects, because in many cases it's a process of engaging public officials, citizens, and bringing them together and talk about how to improve the situation. So my impression is these processes are very intensive, cost intensive, time intensive, and they're often happening in capitals and big cities. So what are your ideas about how to bring scale to this work? And do you have experiences where one good example or good process creates interest somewhere else in the country?
I wonder if for the panel I can add an element to that from our research discussions about the distinction between infomediaries and the scale of that, and intermediaries as the other elements that create.
Did you want to address that question to one of us in particular?
And I'm only the moderator. I'm not here to answer questions. But I think there's an interesting distinction between scaling and replication. I think many of these projects create opportunities for replication. But one of you still need to answer the issue of scalability. I was asked. And especially for Chennai, because you guys are now looking at
moving to other cities. Yeah. Sorry, not to hog the time, but one thing that Transparent Chennai has learned through its experience is that in contexts where there isn't enough data and the ability to create and use that data, there is a lot of human intervention that's actually required. And inherently, then organizations are, then it means scaling up the organization just to ensure that we're scaling up at the city level. One way that we've navigated that is, given that we are a small team, to actually do enough to demonstrate the need for data and innovate on the methodologies and the tools and technologies that can be used, and then to recognize that we as a single organization cannot do that. So recognizing very much that we need to embed this capacity in others to do this. So we constantly think about how can we embed this capacity within the local government, Through our memorandum of understanding with the city government, we are talking about how can the government actually articulate the outcomes that we want for the city, and sort of, even if we just work on toilets, can they then take that methodology and look at parks, schools, any other kind of municipal infrastructure and service they're planning for. We also work with civil society organizations and conduct regular trainings on how do you use maps, GPS, where do you want to, how do you sort of evaluate where you want to use paper maps and then internalize a lot of the costs yourself. So then you need to have that tech capacity inside. And then what we've also been receiving from other civil society organizations are requests to actually mentor them on using data and technology for advocacy. So we don't try and spread ourselves thin by looking at different issues. What we're trying to do is innovate on an approach, a methodology that anybody could then use on any issue they're working on. Right?
Yeah, just very quickly, in the participatory planning and budgeting project that I was involved in, the only one of the learnings that we have is like the only way to address scale would be first to show evidence that it works. And then you can have that kind of a ripple effect that brings a particular practice out to the others within the particular locality. And for example, get it awarded by, in the case of the Philippines, the Galing Po Award, which is given, for example, to exemplary practices in local governance. And the other route would be to legislate it. So, I mean, like, if there's evidence that it works, and then somehow in the process you can see that there's value in doing it. So, like the Philippine government now has this like participatory planning, and they call it bottom-up budgeting process, which is being legislated not as a law but rather as an administrative circular, which practically dwells from or gets its inspiration from the several participatory planning and budgeting workshops or activities or projects that have been done in the past.
Okay, Tim tells me that we've been reduced to, well, I guess now 2 minutes left. I don't know if there's any other question. If not, we could do one of two things. Take one more question, I guess, from the audience.
That would be quite impolite to say no now. My name is Alette from GIZ, the German Development Corporation. My question is also on Transparent Chennai. When we were looking at the pictures, it was very obvious that it was mainly women and children. So I just wanted to ask you if you could say a little bit more about who you involved in the data collection. Was it just by accident or, big background?
Actually, we didn't start with looking at women and children specifically for an issue. We try and, so the intervention that we had in a slum where we looking at access to water, sanitation, and other kinds of municipal infrastructure in that slum. What was obvious was that when we actually went in there to help them create data, what we tried to do was get them to articulate their own problem. And in just getting them to articulate their problem, it was very obvious that the children articulated their problem very differently from the way the women did, and which was different from the way men did. And then we sort of innovated. I mean, it was really a very spur of the moment thing that we said, okay, let's just get a group discussion with under 5 years old children. And the way they articulated the problem of open defecation and the need for sanitation, it just threw up a very different problem. What was happening was the kids were actually, so the women would, try and find an open space to defecate, usually when it's dark, right? In early hours of the morning or very late at night. And the problems that they faced were related to gender safety. While for men, it was just access to sanitation facilities. It was very, very straightforward. For women, it was gender safety. And so we were talking then, how do you improve lighting, or how do you improve, how do you make sure that toilets are open after dark, etc. But for kids, what was happening was they were then using an open drain which ran alongside a road close to the slum to defecate in. And the problems the kids were facing was related to road safety and road engineering, right? And so it was very obvious that sanitation was just such a complex problem that we were thrown up with data or information that we actually didn't expect when we started. And then it was very important that we continuously go back and engage with them and get the local elected representative to actually look at this problem of sanitation in ways that he himself had not thought of. So it had to be sort of iterative.
Okay, very good. I mean, I hope you've gotten a sense of the richness of this, and certainly you'll have an opportunity, as Tim mentioned, to interact with the individual researchers and projects and also the posters. But I hope you see that these cases are certainly illustrative of the fact that within the ODDC network, it has moved away from a kind of supply-side orientation that characterized a lot of early initiatives. It's not just a question of, well, I have more data sets than you, but I mean, certainly these projects have looked very much at the demand side, and lots of insights and much richer insights have emerged from a focus on what the user requires. So I think that's one of the major outputs of this. So thank you all very much for your time. I'll turn back over to Tim.
So we're just a few minutes from the coffee break and chance for deeper conversation. But there's a number of people who were going to give brief pitches. And if you think that applies to you, please come and gather over at this one side of the stage here, ready for doing that. I'm going to balance the laptop and I try and present very, very briefly. I'm not going to show you many of the wider findings we've written up, but I think picking up on what Maurice just said there, many of our discussions yesterday focused on this framework that we started with, talking about the context for open data, the supply, these technical standards I showed earlier, and it really came to us that we had to flip this on its head and sort of look at it the other way around, starting from sectors, starting from problems and issues, and then seeking how technical infrastructures are built up. And whilst this may not seem incredibly sort of revolutionary to do that, it seems at odds with the way many of our open data initiatives are currently being planned, and we think it's quite a key thing for us to explore more. How does that work in practice? How do we be demand driven? How do we do that in our next phase of exploring research? But we also wanted in this event not just to talk about the research we've done in one network, but to recognize that we're part of a wider community of researchers. And so I'm going to skip now to the brief pitch session. We'd offered some people the chance to just come and give you 60 seconds of wider research going on around open data, other people you might want to talk to over the break about their work as well. So if those people who are planning on doing that come and join here, there's a couple of you, I think, who were prepared. What's going to happen is I'm going to hand them the mic. I'm going to be watching a timer for sort of 60 seconds or so and give them the chance to just tell you very briefly why you should find them over the coffee break, chat about their research as well. And because many of the rest of you in this room will also have things to share, I want to point to the Open Data Research Network more broadly, where we've got a mailing list, literature sharing group, LinkedIn group, spaces for dialogue, and we want to really keep building that over the coming years. So we'll hear from just 4 or 5 of them have come up. That's good, excellent. So over to Chris first.
Thanks. My name is Christopher Wilson. I work with an NGO called the Engine Room. And
say to them is if you stand there, you'll be in the book.
And is that the camera there? Hello world. My name is Christopher Wilson. I work for the Engine Room, and we're working on something that we call responsible data. The idea being, as data becomes cheap, accessible, and exciting, more people are using it. But there needs to be more focus on the potential risks for privacy, security, ethical considerations. We've heard a little bit about the potential for ethical representation and how that can be complicated. That's something that we're doing research on, both on how activists and organizations are thinking about these issues and how donors are thinking about these issues, but it's also something that we're trying to help researchers think about. So if you are a researcher and an intermediary or an infomediary or an advocacy organization, and you recognize that there are some tricky issues in how you're using the data, can the data that we're creating be repurposed to support discriminatory policies? Can it incite violence or ethnic tensions? Is there a danger that by releasing this, we're actually stepping on somebody's privacy rights? We probably don't have the answer, but there's a good chance that we can help you figure out what the answer might look like. So we're going to be around and giving clinic type support. If that's useful to anybody, happy to have a conversation or to put you in touch with other people who can help you. You'll see a little sign with a I love data with a heart and a skull and crossbones, and that'll be us if you want to talk more.
Hello, everyone in the room and out there in the world. My name is Samantha Custer. I work for Aid Data. So intuitively, we have this sense that data that is more accessible and relevant will probably have better impact. But what does this actually look like in practice? Aid Data is conducting a series of experiments, randomized control trials in the field to actually test this out, see if we can better understand how people respond to different types of data in different formats. Whether it's in decision making or just in incentivizing people to give feedback. So I won't give away the lessons that we've learned, but you can come find me at the break to find out more.
Hi, I'm Fabrizio Scrolini. I'm the research coordinator of the Iniciativa Latinoamericana por los Datos Abiertos, or the Latin American Open Data Initiative. This is a joint venture between the Organization of American States, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Foundation Avina, these are the three agencies leading this. This is supported by IDRC. What we are trying to do here is to understand more about how open data is used and potentially to foster the open data ecosystems in the region, but looking more at issues of equality, engagement, and broader engagement with several communities that are not quite there yet. So we have an advisory board where some people that are actually in the public are already working on. That would be Ciudadano Inteligente from Chile, Data from Uruguay, Societics from Mexico, also the Red Help, which is the government network on e-government in Latin America, and the Web Foundation and WCC, two well-known organizations working on this field as well. This is quite a broad engagement at the moment. We are trying to narrow it down, and as a result, we are conducting our first studies in the region in 4 areas, or 5 areas basically, which is public services, transparency in government, natural resources and cities, and actually trying to explore what else is out there, and helping policymakers, helping as well the community to figure out essentially the way forward in the region. So if you want to chat about it, if you want to support it, just come and find me.
Hi, I'm Joe. I am the program director for the Open Government Partnerships Independent Reporting Mechanism. So we have put out a data set on the first 43 countries that have completed their first round of action plans or working through their first round of action plans. I'd love to show you what's in it, show you some of the interesting findings we have from it, some interesting factoids. One is, it seems like there actually might be a link between how good the process is and how many commitments are completed in OGP. Another interesting factoid is just because an action plan is more ambitious doesn't mean it doesn't get done. Lots of interesting stuff. Come on over and we can talk through it and we can see what you might be interested in, what you might be able to use from the data.
Hello, I'm Walter Witter. I'm with Open Data Hong Kong and also work in the Hong Kong government on open data strategies. And I just finished a study on 13 countries in Asia on information policies and the data policies. And these are countries from Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Indonesia. I don't count them all, but mostly East Asia. They're in the World Bank Index of East Asia. And the interesting thing I found is that there's no relationship between the GDP of a country and open data readiness. So rich countries are not necessarily leading in open data efforts, but what really matters is the communication between civil society and government. And that is seriously distorted in many Asian countries. And I found an interesting concept from the intercultural management, which is called power distance. And I have created a new index which is called information power distance, and that describes the distance that a normal citizen has to even think about asking the government for information. And in some countries this is really high, and for instance in Malaysia the power distance is the highest, which means that if you are not empowered by education or by money or by something like that, it doesn't even cross your mind that you could get data from the government. So I think this is quite an important factor to look at. Another interesting factor I find is education. In many of these countries, do you actually have library information science and any education that builds information aware people? And in some of these countries, there is not even library information science. So that's also a lack of readiness for open data. And clearly also, that's also on the part of the civil society, but also on the part of the government. Very civil servants in those countries have an information background. Yeah, that's all. And the study is just released. It will be under Creative Commons, and you can download it later on from various websites. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Zara. I work on a project called the Open Development Toolkit, which is an initiative from the School of Data from Open Knowledge and Development Initiatives. The project started with the premise that data availability is not the same as data accessibility. There's more and more data available, especially with IATI, with aid data, but often it is very scattered around the internet. So we've curated main data portals and tools that are available, outlining their strengths and weaknesses. And we've also noticed that there's lots of duplication going on. There's lots of new data portals coming out almost every week. Tool developers aren't open sourcing their code, and when they are, they're not providing the documentation needed for others to actually use that code and build upon what other people have done. So we're trying to provide guidance materials to help civil society and journalists find and use data, and starting with the questions that they're wanting to answer and find those within the data, and also working with tools, hoping to work with tools developers to make sure that they're building upon what other people have done and not reinventing the wheel. So if any of that sounds interesting, come and find me later.
And as we go to the break, my pitch would be to mention today we've put on the Open Data Research Network website and in our newsletter a report that tries to capture some of the insights from this project, and you'll find that and we'll tweet that out. I also want to draw your attention to the second poster to the end here from Bernard Sabiti, who I think is joining us on the live stream but hasn't been able to join us here due to visa issues, but I think really encourage you to look at that research and get in touch with the development research and training team who looked at Kenya and Uganda's open data. And lastly, and quite importantly, to say we're not only sharing research, we're also sharing cultures and sharing sweets from different countries. So hopefully at the back there are still on the table some sweet things that different people brought from their group. So what we're going to do now is until just before 4 o'clock, have a chance for an extended coffee break, a chance to talk by the posters with the researchers about their individual research or with those other people who are here, and we'll reconvene, as I say, just before 4. For those on the live stream, we'll pause the streaming, but we'll bring that back around 4 o'clock. So thank you all. And then we'll be talking then about sectors, an absolutely good, fascinating panel coming up on open data in specific sectors before we come to our close and travel all together to the festival launch if you're joining us there. If I could ask everyone to start gathering again, we're going to get started with our afternoon panel. The incentive to get you quiet is that the microphones are now back on and webcasting, so any conversations you have could be being relayed to the world. So if you could grab seats again, please, and welcome back to those on our webcast. We'll start again in a few moments.
Se usa mucho en las comunidades de programadores, pero es recientemente más popular. Nosotros a las... Oh, yes, sorry. Pero ese te puede gustar más.
Please do come and grab seats. We're going to get started again in 30 seconds. Slightly longer, maybe, but I'm going to say that. Okay, if I can get everyone to take your seats, we want to make sure we start on time and finish with plenty of time to make it to the Open Knowledge Festival launch later on this evening, still with energy to also join the evening festivities. So, as was discussed earlier, the focus of our work has been on open data in use and exploring those emerging impacts. And one of those spaces in which both that is researchable and also we want to keep exploring and has come out of the work is in different specific sectors. Each has its own governance settings, its own issues, its own data sets. And we've got 4 panelists to have our final session on sectors, similar format previously, so start thinking of the questions you want to ask, and then we'll wrap up at the end. So over to Fabrizio.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'm joined today with 4 extraordinary people that took on several challenges in the developing world in dealing with established institutions, with new research areas. And so as a result, I'm going to introduce them now. So we have Sandra Elena from Argentina, from CIPEC, which is a think tank dealing with several governance issues in Argentina, and she will introduce her work briefly. Then we have Francois Schoolbeck. That will be, no, okay, but I tried, right? I think I made my best, good. And he's an independent researcher based in South Africa who has been dealing with the use of open data in universities with his team. Then we have Nidhi Sivatava, sort of. Well done, yes, good. And so essentially, she has been looking at the use of open data in extractive industries, in particular in energy in India. And we also have Ilham Sedenkiasiram Silmarga. Well done, good, thank you. And Ilham has been looking at budget issues in Indonesia. So these are extremely complex topics when we approach to map them and to understand them. So it's not that just people open data and fix stuff. It's actually a bit more complex. So I'm going to let them introduce their work to essentially state and tell us a bit more about their organizations and the research questions they face.
Thank you, Fabricio. I'm Sandra Elena. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm from CIPEC, from Argentina. CIPEC is an NGO and think tank based in Buenos Aires, and we are a center for a study of public policies. I am the director of the Justice and Transparency Department, and in this case, we conducted a research on emerging impacts of the use of open data in the judiciary in Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. We selected 3 countries because they have promoting open data or access to information policies at the executive level, and also in some cases at the Congress level. But the judiciaries are still old-fashioned. They are not promoting access to information or open data policy. So we considered that included in the open data debate, the judiciaries would be added value to the discussion. So this is why we presented this project, which is very unusual in the open data discussions. So why the judiciaries? In part because they are one of the branches of the state, and they are a very important actor in democratic governance, and we felt like that they were being neglected from attention from the open data and access to information community. And also because access to justice is one of the most important human rights, because if you don't have access to justice, you cannot enforce your other rights like education, sanitation, health, and others. So this is why the reasons why we selected the judiciary to work with. And then
we can come back to.
Thanks, Sandra. I'm not going to introduce myself again because Fabricio did a good job already, except on my surname. But we'll just stick to first names. I think it's a little bit easier. In our case, maybe what was quite different from the other research projects is that our governance setting was very specific. So we were looking at how open data is used in the governance of public universities in South Africa. There are 23 public universities. And we had a very simple question. We wanted to know whether the data that an intermediary was providing was in fact being used. There was an assumption that it was being used, and we wanted to find out whether this was in fact the case. We spoke to 2 particular groupings. We spoke to the university planners. So each university typically has a planning department that's responsible for the strategic direction of the university. They would normally advise council who would take the executive decisions, and we wanted to check whether the open data was being used in this decision making as they tried to steer the university. We also included a second grouping, which was higher education studies researchers, but we see them as playing a valuable role in the research policy nexus. So they would be using this open data to inform their own research that in turn, in theory, would link up to policy, which would influence the steering of the national university system.
Thank you, Francois. Yes. My name is Ilham Sedekias Trimarka,
maybe it's very hard to speak in German or Latino. Yes, I come from Indonesia. My organization is Sinar Gantara. It's an NGO that works in open data, ICT development, and good governance. Our work is our focus in understanding about open data in governance in Indonesia, and also we are also develop some initiative that is more practically to make open data happen, like advocacy or technical assistance to the city level government, and also develop application that we work together with making all voice con we call Game Village application that is to make that data can be used in the local participatory planning with data visualization. This is our background of my organization, and my research is on understanding the open data initiative on national budget in Indonesia. Indonesia as a country that have that transparency has accepted and grown very fast. The open budget transparency is conducted by Ministry of Finance in Indonesia, and all of the budget in all of the national budget has been put in the website in Indonesia. It is something that is very new in Indonesia, and this is also is rule out the pessimistic about budget is very sensitive issue, but now the central government have been make it on the website, but there is some question for us from in this research on about how the use on this initiative, and how is also the impact of from this.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nidhi Srivastav from TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute. In the study that we undertook, what we did was to review the availability and accessibility of open government data in energy extractive resources. We focused on coal and oil and gas upstream issues there. The reason we looked at energy resources was given the demand-supply gap that exists in energy in India, and also in recent past, this sector has been has received a lot of attention in terms of governance issues that exist in these two sectors, whether it is with respect to functioning of these two sectors themselves, or in terms of their performance, as well as the environmental and social impact that it has had. So we looked at the status of data in these two sectors, and also the issues that users face in accessing this data, as well as suppliers in making data open to whatever extent.
So as you can see, these are diverse sectors. They do face very different challenges in the developing world, and I would like to stay with you actually, and essentially, if you could elaborate a bit more about essentially the challenges, you know, that this organization actually face when releasing data, but crucially as well about other findings that you actually, we were talking about this before, you know, who is using the data, what it is used for, and essentially how actually that address some of the important issues you highlight about the sector in India.
Right. If you look at the data landscape that exists for energy resources, and that is something that's really important for a sectoral approach, because it really varies from sector to sector. And even in energy resources, we saw that the data landscape that existed for coal was very different from oil and gas. And the number of players that existed, the number of stakeholders, both in terms of suppliers, users, as well as the intermediaries that existed in making data available and accessible to people. It was huge, you know, a large number of people. And what we found was that
it was so complex that there was a lot of data that just did not exist. And during the break, people were asking me, oh, you did a study on energy data. Does any data exist at all? So that there is a large amount of data that is like that. But the second and the most important category of data is data that is available but not accessible to public. And that is due to a variety of reasons in terms of accessing, because it is fragmented. There are barriers to accessing it in terms of confidentiality, and sometimes governments are extra cautious. They don't know, they are not willing to put them subject to any kind of scrutiny or accountability there. And also, where data is made accessible, it is more often not usable. And that links to issues of, say, quality of data, or sometimes even content of data. And when I say content of data, we find that when we look at these two sectors, coal and oil and gas, there is some kind of data that the government puts out in the open with respect to economic aspects of this sector, say with respect to production, consumption, and also physical data with respect to resources and reserves, etc. But there is a huge gap when it comes to environmental and social data, where both these sectors have an enormous impact on the environment, as well as people, communities. And these two areas are where data is just not accessible to people, even where it exists with the government. Then so what really emerges here is that since there are these different kinds of data sets that exist, and different government agencies within each of these sectors are putting out data, there is a really a need for some kind of synergy amongst the different government agencies that are putting out data, as well as different initiatives. Because the Open Government Data portal and the open data policy in India is fairly new, but the government machinery has been collecting and publishing data in these two sectors for really long. And we really need to synergize different data sets and initiatives, because right now there is multiplicity of data, and it is the same data that is being put out again and again, because it is largely supply driven. So the same data sets on say consumption, production, that they keep putting out, rather than giving out data on other aspects, as I mentioned, environment and social. And in this context, what really emerged in our study was that the role of intermediaries is really important in making sure that the data that the government is putting out is relevant for improving transparency and other governance factors in this sector. And also, the data is more useful for the public. And it's not just some numbers, but making sure that it really makes government accountable for these two sectors.
That's very good. I really like this distinction between, is it available, accessible, usable, and there seems to be a lot of governance issues around, which goes well beyond data, but more about power structures and people who has control on the data, and eventually the role of intermediaries. I think that this is quite interesting in an area which is complex and highly debatable. I would like to move to an area which should be more or less complex in a way, because data should be available and accessible, such as the university's realm, basically. And then I would like to hear Francois about whether is that true, is that accessible, that available, and if so, actually people actually benefit of that? Is something happening there?
I think I'm going to take one step back. There are quite a few findings, and I'm not going to elaborate on all of them. I'll try and address your question in particular. Some people have made some quite rude comments about my poster, particularly the color scheme. But what they don't realize is I can point to my poster very easily. It's the bright one in the middle. And you'll find on that poster a fairly crude attempt at plotting an ecosystem. And a lot of the findings relate to that interaction in that ecosystem. So to come back to your question about the availability and the use of data, I think what we found specifically is that there are several suppliers in the ecosystem. In fact, there are 3 suppliers. One is government itself. They put their own data up on the website. This data comes from a closed database that's not accessible. Nevertheless, there are 2 other intermediaries that work in the ecosystem, and they are very different. One is an NGO. It receives funding and it accesses this data from government and makes it available on its website via a particular platform. And then there's a third provider, which is a private company. And that private company takes the very same data from the government and sells it back to the universities. And the universities subscribe to the data. So the sort of linear or consequential links that we might assume exist don't always exist in a data ecosystem. And I say data ecosystem, not necessarily open data ecosystem, because I think there's an interplay between open and closed data that we need to be mindful of.
That's quite interesting. This idea of intermediate keystone species, I think, is the word in that. It's actually, you can look at it from here. I mean, yeah, it's quite noticeable. And I think that the role of intermediates again emerge. So coming back then to what seems to be more discrete institutions that they essentially are there, but we don't usually pay too much attention to them. Are these institutions either transparent or not? Or what are your findings in these 3 countries?
You're right. The judiciary is the most conservative of the branches of the state, and as citizens, we don't look at judiciaries and we don't monitor or ask for accountability to the judiciary. So they have worked in opacity for a long time. But I have to say that this is changing a little bit, at least in the 3 countries I analyzed. There has been a path towards transparency in the judiciaries, but they are still being very closed to the people. We found, as this was a comparative study, we could find similarities and also very interesting differences between the 3 countries. And one of the questions is about the country context in terms of transparency and open government, if this affects or not the judiciaries. And we found different situations. For example, in Chile, there is a transparent country context and also a more transparent judiciary. In Uruguay, the country context is also very transparent, but the judiciary is very, very closed. And in Argentina, it's a mix. We don't have much transparency at national level. We don't have an access to information law, for example, but the judiciary is moving forward towards transparency. So one similarity is that in each of the 3 countries, the public officials at the judiciary didn't know anything about the concept of open data. So this is our key finding, because we realized that in some cases they didn't want to provide more information and use open data, but in other cases just because they don't know about it. The concept is not very promoted in our countries, so there is a lot of room for improvement in that area. So they are not using open data, only some databases, not big data. And other finding is that there's a huge gap between the supply of data and the demand. As some of the colleagues said in the former panels, we have the judiciary thinks that they are transparent because they provide a lot of information in their web pages, but then when you analyze the use and you conduct interviews with the users, you realize that the information they provide is not the information the users need. So this is something that we have also to work with and to make judiciaries understand how we need the information, what kind of information. Mostly we need more disaggregated information. So then other thing that we found is that you know, the 3 levels of impact of open data: transparency and accountability, economic development, and inclusion. We can say that the emerging impact is only to make judiciaries more transparent. We think that the changes are towards transparency, but we didn't have any evidence that this is leading to more accountability within the systems. And last thing I would like to say is that the research, the knowledge, in our case, usually produces change. And this is important because when we release these studies, these research studies, we have a reaction from the judiciary. The Chief Justice of Argentina sent me a letter the day after I released the report saying this is wrong and you have to change this because so this is a strong reaction, and I think it works.
Right, and still you are here, which is great. Not the implications that at all. I think it's actually true. I mean, the way that we confront these institutions that are not usually, you know, these are oversight institutions that usually we don't actually look at them, which is quite interesting to see how that play goes and how actually open data can enhance their own accountability and actually some of the good work they already do, as you also find in the report. And then in this other area, which seems to be like the dream of the armchair accountant, you know, looking at the data of budgets in countries, so we get to know exactly how people spend their money, or how governments actually spend their money. What are your findings in Indonesia? What are you seeing? Is this data being used? If so, how? If not, which is the challenge?
Yes, actually in Indonesia now the data using is growing. After there is Indonesian reformation, decentralization, and civil society is growing up, and also local government has, because decentralization have their own role in using the data, and then it should be that data that is provided by the Minister of Finance that it put in the web, it should be used by them. But what we found in the early past on the research is they are not using this data. When all of the data is put by the Minister of Finance in Indonesia, the GSO and the local government doesn't use this data. They are continuing their on method to get the data. They get the data not from this website. They are not used this online, but they are GSO is still asking the data from their colleagues in the government, in the parliament. It's like that. So this research is then try to understand why. What we found, that is what the response that we got from the GSO. Why you don't use this data? Is it not easier for you? No, this data is very globally. This data is national level data. Is globally. Is aggregate data, and the demand set is need the data that is more that have context. Well, the data in the website doesn't have context. So what we found is that transparency is only transparency is not enough. It must be that there are more than transparency. That is how the data must be linked with the context, like with map with other local information that it will be make the people understand about the data. And also in the supply side level, what we found that is why our main question is about why what is your expectation about the impact. It's like that, and the answer is like this: the impact is not our side. The impact is civil civil society side, or what our that is our responsibility is to provide the data open, because it is asking is obligated by the rules, and when the data is open, we have accountable. So there are some like issue accountability versus like what my colleague said about accountability versus fulfillment of the information service. This is this is our phone.
Okay, that's interesting because in a way, context seems to be, I mean, it's, you know, in a way it seems to be very relevant as a result of like not only aggregate data will actually make it useful, but contextualized to the needs of people seems to be a key, which is a long, I mean, a long and difficult work to do and achieve meaningfully. I wanted to open up to the public, essentially, to either you have questions, comments about what our panelists were saying, and essentially to keep exploring these areas. If you have issue-specific areas, or if you have more broader questions, you're more than welcome to ask. We understand we are standing between you and the last panel. It's the next three incoming. We understand that, but
I apologize, but hopefully it's not a boring question. So you said that you guys looked for evidence of accountability due to better transparency in the judiciary. What indicators would you use, and what should we look for to see that a judiciary is more accountable and is reacting to being more open?
I said we haven't seen any evidence of accountability. I mean, they are providing data which is not political sensitive. So that data that can make a different, for example, disclosure of assets for judges, which is a eternal fight. As organizations and users, we are asking for that information, and they have that information, but they don't disclose it. So this can lead to more accountability, but they don't disclose that data. And same, for example, they provide the statistics, but not the statistics as we users want, more disaggregated, that you can see productivity along different courts. So all the data that could lead to more accountable courts are still not there. They provide information that is aggregated, sometimes outdated, and it's not leading to get any accountability or a monitoring or evaluation from civil society to the courts.
For instance, there was this issue about the appointments of judges in Argentina, I remember, right? And that information about the appointment is not transparent at all. I mean, is that the case?
It is not, that is not transparent. You have the rules online, you have the candidates, but then there are some room for discretion, but it doesn't have to, it's not related to open data, and it's related to the institutional arrangements, right, mostly. Still, some of the sessions are closed, so you cannot see the interviews. So in that aspect, it may be opaque. But
we have a second question from the auditorium.
Thank you very much. Carol Excel from the World Resources Institute and the Access Initiative. I was very interested in your comment about the lack of access to environmental and social data in India, and I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about what types of data you actually look for and what justifications, if any, were provided for refusal of that information. And if you could talk about differences a little between the different resources, if there were similarities across all or there were differences. Thank you very much.
So in terms of environmental data for these two sectors, we were looking mostly at different levels. One, looking at deforestation, lack of forest cover, because a lot of coal reserves are in forest areas. So we were looking at that, and how much of actual forest cover is being lost. There are records, but it is not openly and easily accessible to the public. And for this, the excuse, what you're asking, what kind of excuse is given for not giving. So we did not have governments saying that, okay, this is a confidentiality issue, we will not give it to you or anything. But the barrier that existed in accessing this data was more in terms of timeliness and getting this data in a comprehensive and in a complete manner. So what we could do was look at individual mining plans and look at how much forest cover is being lost if that mining plan is adhered to, but not going backward and looking at, okay, so this much forest cover has been lost to XYZ mine. In terms of a difference between the two sectors, coal and oil and gas, it wasn't much in terms of, because it's the same ministry and it's the same government agencies that are giving out data for environmental impacts. And so one was in terms of environmental loss of forest cover. The other one is with respect to pollution control. So we were looking at the impact on water bodies, especially because in both coal and onshore oil and gas, there is a lot of offshore oil and gas reserves and platforms in India. We did not look at environmental impact of environmental data around offshore oil and gas, which would be very important, but it was just difficult for us to look at. So looking at data in terms of quality of water bodies and air quality, we found that there are pollution control boards in India, and then there are central, and then there are state pollution control boards. So there was a lot of passing the buck that was going around in giving access to this data. And wherever certain data was available, it was broken and fragmented. So suppose certain states were indeed putting out or releasing data on air quality and water quality around coal mines, it was given for one isolated year, or it was given for 2 years, and then there's a gap of 1 year, and they'll start giving it out again. So that kind of fragmentation was there. I think I answered.
I really like the passing the bucket expression. I came across that a lot of times. It's pictures of. I have another question from the audience. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Anne, working for GIZ, German Development Corporation in Bangladesh, in a justice and prison reform program, together with the Ministry of Home and the Ministry of Justice. I have a question to all panelists. I wanted to know in how far your research, if you could give examples of how your research has informed or is informing decision makers.
That's great. Whoever wants to take that first, Francois. Maybe.
For our sector in research, the decision-making bodies, we could, well, I understand there are limitations, but we could divide them into two, one which was sector-specific and one which are dealing with larger open government data initiative in India. It's unfortunate that the sector specific ministries and departments are not really interacting with the open government data agencies in India. So to an extent, we've initiated, or not initiated, but at least we facilitated that dialogue through our consultations and consultative workshops that we've had. And we've also tried to connect with the Open Data Portal nodal agency in India, and we're trying to help them. And this is something that we hope to do with this study and further to help them understand what the demands of users are, because right now the Open Data Initiative is very heavily supply driven. The government is giving out data, whatever is the most convenient, as we heard about justice as well. So whatever is most convenient, we just.
Yes, our research is focus is in the one initiative the initiative of the one ministry in Indonesia, Ministry of Finance, and we also work with other initiative open data. Actually, the Ministry of Finance initiative is not open data. It's but about budget transparency. But some but some official said that it's in the embryo open data, and we are to make comparison with other open data. We have also work with some other institutions that work with in open data initiative, like Indonesia there's the Office of President that work on open data. And also there is one local government that work in open data. So we are trying to get sense of open data when it has been started and that budget transparency that is still being embryo of open data. Yes.
So if I understand your question correctly, it's about the impact of the research itself rather than about the open data. So I can cite one example is that, as I said, we discovered these 3 intermediaries, and one impact will be that the intermediary that we have the closest interaction with is having to reconsider its role in this ecosystem, because there's this commercial competitor, and if it wants to continue the use of their data, they have to think very carefully about what they supply. So, for example, in our case, when we spoke to the higher education researchers, they want far more granular data. The people in the university planning departments, they're happy with indicators. It's much easier for them to report to council using indicators that council is already familiar with. So this NGO now has to decide, well, do we continue with indicators, in which case we compete directly with the commercial entity, or do we evolve the indicators to make them more interesting, or do we start focusing on the higher education researchers and customize the platform to talk directly to them? So the change will happen at that particular level in our case.
The impact of this particular research is still too early to say. We think that it will probably impact on the design of public policy, but this research is part of our long access to information strategy, and I can tell you a short story about the impact of each of our research. 10 years ago, we began a research project on access to information. We submitted requests for access to information to the government. They denied the information. We began file a lawsuit, and this year, after 8 years of litigation, we got a decision in our favor. And the decision, of course, the information is not anymore of any use to us, but it was very important because the Chief Justice ordered the Congress to pass a law on access to information. We have been fighting for almost 15 years to have an access to information law, but now, because of our research 10 years ago, we have a judicial order to the Congress to pass the law on access to information. So the impact of this kind of research, probably you cannot assess it immediately, but after many years, I cannot even recall in which specific project was that request, but you can assess impact in the long term.
And you already got a letter. I mean, that's a start,
yeah.
Right? So we have time probably for one short question over there. Yes.
There's been a lot of really great comments. I'm sorry, Jed Miller. There's been a lot of great comments about the difference between availability of data and usability of data. And my comment is that I think it's important to think not just about usability, but usefulness of data as distinct, which has been mentioned, and also how to plan for uptake of data. And I think there's a little bit of a difference between usefulness even and uptake. You know, how far will it go? My question is, has anyone considered, since usability is something that most publishers and intermediaries are thinking about more and more, creating a shared standard of usability, a set of questions that we can query against data sets as to what makes them usable?
Is that something that came across your research?
The difference between usability and usefulness, of course, came up again and again, but not so much, with respect to uptake, I think. But I agree that sometimes usability is actually an excuse for not putting out useful data. The governments are saying that, okay, we put it in this format, and it is so, it is usable, and it is, it is in all these fancy formats. You can manipulate it, you can do whatever you want, but that data is hardly useful to the public. So I agree, and I think uptake, we haven't really looked at it.
Also, I guess part of the role of the intermediary, sorry, to go into the uptake of data and see how that actually happens, which I think across the cases is one of the things that we don't get to see. That's why
I just want to pick up on that quickly, and it answers your question, but maybe a little bit more obliquely. And that's the case. We had this discussion yesterday. If an intermediary is commercially focused, they talk to their audience. If they don't, they cease to exist. They need to know that they're using the data and that there's uptake. Otherwise, the model collapses. With the NGOs, it's not so clear. I mean, they're funding imperatives. There are all sorts of other reasons why they might make something open. It might just be a purely moral imperative. And so use is not necessarily the indicator. Although funders are also introducing more metrics to ensure that this is happening. So, there's a counter again. So we also have to think about how, exactly what you were saying, each intermediary might play a very different role in that usability assessment.
And I guess that this is the end of...
Although I was going to bring in one comment. So Bernard, who's following on the live stream but couldn't be with us, has Skyped me a comment to say, acknowledging the context and data cultures locally is really important to uptake. So in their work in Kenya and Uganda, they found PDFs, big books, and notice boards, which they say the most famous way of sharing data in Uganda, aren't just going to disappear tomorrow. So thinking about how to interface with those traditional routes of uptake, routes of access to information in specific sectors, in specific areas where those are actionable is really key. Their approach has not been to abolish those or talk about getting rid of those, but has been to seek to show officials the possibility of machine readable data, the possibility of data visualization and using ICT, and let that sort of drive uptake through demonstrating the potential. So that's Bernard's comment, mangled through my...
No, that's a great point. I mean, actually, it is true. We're working in contexts where, these traditional ways of communications and traditional ways of actually information flows are not just going to disappear because we are talking about open data. And so that's something to keep in mind. Just to summarize, we have been discussing a lot about, power structures and how actually they might influence the release or not of information, and crucially about, usefulness of this data by key intermediaries. And I think that the last part of our conversation about key intermediaries, uptake of this information, and how to drive this agenda forward, and what actually are they doing to drive this agenda forward is key to the mission of the whole endeavor, of the whole research project, to understand essentially in which context this makes sense. So overall, I think this is our panel finishing, and I pass this to Tim, who probably want to close this.
Yes. So to wrap up the event, I will put on screen in a moment, but won't talk to just a slide telling you about some of the other things that are happening beyond here that we'd really like to carry on these conversations. There will be no shortage of opportunity over the next few days of the Open Knowledge Festival to draw attention to two sessions in particular that come out of work in this network. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. 2 p.m. Yes, is Transparent Cities, a case bringing together a number of different city government officials and CSOs who've been working on openness, transparency data in their cities to have an interactive workshop around that. So please do join Satyarupa and others who are working on that case, Ricardo, I think, and so on. And on Thursday at 12 noon, I'm looking around for someone who might be able to confirm the time, we have a session on ground-up intermediaries, exploring what this intermediation looks like when designed from the ground up rather than the data down. So I hope you can join us for those. And also through the Open Data Research Network, through the newsletter there, through the LinkedIn groups, through the other opportunities for communication, we want to keep building conversation there. And over the next couple of months, we'll be sharing small insights from each of these studies, in case you haven't already had a chance to read them all and read their weighty reports as well as their posters. So
you want to say anything in closing other than that? So I will simply thank you all for joining us in the conversation and sharing thoughts, reflections with us, and look forward to talking with you all more over the coming days. So thank you all, and thank you to all our panelists and researchers.